chapter 8, verses 27 to 33. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Lord, reveal to me the awesome mystery of your person. In you is hidden my being. In you is hidden the mission for my life. In you is hidden my future happiness. Let me not measure the future by what I think I can do for you, but rather by what your power can do with my generosity. May this prayer convince me of the necessity of welcoming you daily through prayer, contemplation, and a sacramental life of grace and conversion. Lord, grant me an experience of you strong enough to overcome all spiritual laziness and tepidity. Who has Christ been for you? Our prayer must lead us to respond to Christ's question, "Who do you say that I am?" This is the only test, the only examination question we need to pass in life. We must reflect and respond to the question from this perspective, "Who has Christ been for you?" This question does not so much define Christ, but the one who answers it. What experiences have we had of him? What have we been learning about Christ personally, through experiences that we cannot have known by solemn definitions, by routine external piety, or by what others say? Christ's history and our personal history must intertwine to become a single chapter which we both share. Who have you been for Christ? If I have little to say as far as my first-hand knowledge of Jesus, if my interior experiences have been eclipsed by a mundane and materialistic spirit, I must take Christ's question to the next level. Who have I been for Christ? Who I have been for Christ will be determined largely by who I have been for him in prayer. The inner Christ is known only by those to whom it is revealed. It will not happen by a merely flesh and blood approach, nor by just going with the flow of human events. Peter's interior life was fertile ground for the Father. His testimony was not luck, but was a divine intervention in his soul, from which his faith drew its strength. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. May I seek in a special way the grace of greater sensitivity to let my interior life of prayer define me and shape my character. Can Christ count on me? Poor Peter. In one moment he is revealing the thoughts of the Father, in the next, Satan's. Peter's living experience of Christ is the target of Satan's attempts to break his faith. Christ's suffering will be the pledge that the faith of the apostle will not fail. I have prayed for you. Ultimately, Christ's prayer would prevail. Peter is reborn on Pentecost, fearlessly accepting and launching the mission of the church. A strong interior foundation in Christ ultimately leads to one last reality check of the spiritual life. Can Christ build on me because I am built on him? Christ's fidelity will uphold me if I stay in the battle, if I hold firm, and don't let the reality of my falls keep me from advancing. Satan cannot break my faith if I keep fighting, and for this I always have to have new goals, to begin fresher, better, and more generously than before. Lord, according to the riches of your glory, grant that I may be strengthened in my inner being with power through your Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in my heart through faith. Being rooted and grounded in love, I pray that I may have the power to comprehend, with all the saints, what is the breadth and the length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, so that I may be filled with all the fullness of you.
Daily Meditations of Pope Benedict XVI, presented by Leonardo Di Philippis of St. Luke Productions.
The purpose of Lent. The purpose of Lent is to keep alive in our consciousness and our life the fact that being a Christian can only take the form of becoming a Christian ever anew. That it is not an event, but a process requiring constant practice. If individuals are to become Christians, they need the strength to overcome. They need the power to stand fast against the natural tendency to let themselves be carried along. Only where such effort is expended is there life. Where the effort ceases, life too ceases. The human person is the being which does not become itself automatically, nor does it do so simply by letting itself be carried along and surrendering to the natural gravitational pull of a kind of vegetative life. It becomes itself always and only by struggling against the tendency simply to vegetate, and by dint of a discipline that is able to rise above the pressures of routine and to liberate the self from the compulsions of utilitarian goals and instincts. Our world is so full of what immediately impinges on our senses that we are in danger of seeing only details and losing sight of the whole. It takes effort to see beyond what is right in front of us and to free ourselves from the tyranny of what directly presses upon us.
This meditation is taken from Benedictus, published by Ignatius Press and Magnificat, and produced by St. Luke Productions. Learn more at stlukeproductions.com.
Today is Thursday, the 16th of February, in the 6th week of Ordinary Time. The monks of Pluscaden Abbey sing Laetetur cor quarentium. Let the heart of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord and be strengthened. Seek his face always. Entering into prayer today, I too am seeking the Lord, seeking his face, looking for the signs of his presence in my life, gently guiding me in truth and peace and love. Today's reading is from the Gospel of Mark.
Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things."
Jesus is on the road yet again when he decides it's time to ask his closest followers a direct question. The first question might have been almost casual, but then he makes it much more personal. "But who do you say that I am?" Perhaps he asked the first question as they walked along, but then stopped and looked at them as he asked the second question. How do you imagine it happening? Can you picture the scene, the faces, the voices? Now imagine yourself being asked that question. But who do you say that I am? Either as one of the disciples in this scene, or right here, right now. Pause with that question for a moment. Who is he for you? Who do you hope he is? Who do you long for him to be, for you, for the world? As you hear the passage once more, notice how the conversation continues after Peter's confession of faith.
Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things."
Jesus goes on to speak of being rejected by everyone, suffering and even being killed. Peter finds this so difficult to hear that an argument breaks out between him and Jesus. What feelings does this talk of suffering give rise to in you? Speak to Jesus now about this. Perhaps you want to argue with him too, or say something about your own pain and suffering. Whatever it is you want to say, speak freely.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.